It is now my great pleasure to introduce our last speaker for the evening. It's not often that you get to hear from Paralympians. Scott Reardon is a Paralympian with a difference in that he became a Paralympian or became disabled through a farming accident. So he is very close to all of our hearts. Come on. Because he's now passionate about farm safety, and I think it's something that should be very dear to all of our hearts and it needs to be at the forefront. So Scott is an awesome sprinter, Paralympic champion, but also a twice world record holder water skier. So please join me in welcoming Scott.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. I try not to hold you guys too long. I know that there's a beer that's not far after this, so I'm sure that you're more interested in that than me speaking at the moment, but hopefully I can entertain you a little bit and tell you a little bit about my story and kind of how I ended up to be here and yeah, just the journey that I've taken over the years. So as mentioned, my journey starts out in the country, New South Wales town of Temora. Grew up on the family farm there and something that I really cherish the time that I spent in the local community and on the farm in Temora, and it taught me so many things about life and about just so many things that I experienced through that time period that I really carry through the rest of my life. One thing that I did get from being in a small community and a farming community is that sport plays a huge part in any community, but I think in a small country town like Temora, sport became a huge part of my life very early on. And from when I was a really small kid, I'm not that big now, but when I was a really small kid, I always imagined that I'd be playing rugby league for Australia or running for Australia, and it's a vision that I'd always had. And I'd always been working my absolute most to try and be as successful as I possibly could. I was a rugby league player and a representative 100-metre runner as well. And these visions that I had were something that I was working my way towards, and this particular day in 2002, so July 10th, 2002, at the ripe old age of 12, my brother and I were working down at the family farm. We're basically digging holes as a part of a land care project that we were undertaking. Basically, we were building a fence line that was going to go around some trees that we were planting. Obviously, when you're running head of sheep and cattle, you spend all this money planting trees, and if you go and don't put a fence around them, obviously that's work that's not very worthwhile. So 2002 for Temora was quite a dry year, and in July we were still looking for some rain, and as we were digging these holes, my dad, myself and my brother had been working all day, and Dad just went home to grab the spray unit for the day, and he was going to come spray the paddock, and then we were going to pack up shop and head to football training, my brother and I. And when my brother and I saw that Dad left, we thought it'd be a pretty good idea for this last hole that we were digging to stand on the frame of the post hole digger that we were working on. I remember standing there and I looked down and I realised my shoelace was undone. The next thing I remember, I wake up on the ground, the lower part of my leg was completely amputated. We're 2.5 kilometres down a paddock, 35 kilometres from the closest hospital. Got to say I've been in better spots in my life. I was pretty fortunate that at that particular moment that the post-hole digger decided to throw me out rather than actually keep sucking me in, and probably, as I look back today, I probably shouldn't be here and I probably shouldn't have survived that accident. And so I was very, very fortunate to wake up on the ground, but I was no way was I out of trouble, and no way was I safe, and I was going to be ticking that bucket of I was going to be living. And instinctively, I got up and I hopped to the ute, and by this stage, my brother, who was 16 and I was 12 at the time, he'd turned off the tractor and we'd started heading back over to the house. And we got back to the house, and I realised that the fastest mode of transport to get back into town was in the car. Having experienced a workplace accident before, about 5 years before, when Dad almost cut his arm off with an angle grinder, you think we would have learnt the first time rather than have to experience it twice. But I knew that that fastest mode of transport was a car, and I got out of the ute and I hopped into the car, and my brother went inside to grab a belt, and by this stage my dad had turned the tractor around and he'd met us at the car to then drive us into the town. One thing, my whole story, there's a lot of key messages in it, but I think there's one that really kind of stands out to me and stands out to a lot of people who are in the farming industry is when things happen on a farm, the effect the effects that have on the broader community and not just the people who are involved or the person that's involved. And there's one particular moment that I still remember, this is 16 years down the track, was when I'm sitting in the back seat of the car, my dad walks around the back of the car, collapses to the ground and starts bawling his eyes out as he saw his 12-year-old son sitting in the back of the car with his leg amputated. I think that's something that when we start to talk about farm and workplace safety, I think it's a really key message to see and to understand that workplaces are extremely dangerous and farm workplaces are extremely dangerous. And that particular moment kind of highlights for me how the effect that having this type of accident has on not only myself but the people around me. We kind of gathered ourselves up and we decided that the best option for me at that particular time was to jump on the road and start heading to the local hospital. Mum went inside and started calling 000 to try and get the ambulance service to come out to our farm and to try and meet us along the way. And at that time in 2002, if you try to direct an ambulance to our farm, it was impossible. They're asking from a call centre down in Wollongong what the closest crossroads is. There's a name of a road that doesn't exist in their system. We've got very little options to actually pin a spot on a phone back in 2002. That type of technology didn't exist. So our GPS coordinates were unknown to us. And the roads, the official names of the roads were unknown to us as well. So Mum ended up hanging up on the 000 and actually called the Temora Hospital and said, send an ambulance out to Pete Reardon's house. And sure enough, we met the ambulance about 10 kilometres out of Temora. They stabilised me on the side of the road. And then I went and was transferred to Temora Hospital, where I was stabilised, but no way was I going to say that I was going to live. I was fortunate enough that the Snowy Howdra Southcare rescue helicopter was called to Temora. The expert service there stabilised me and then flew me down here to Canberra, where I spent the next 3.5 weeks in hospital, recovering from my injuries and trying to kind of comprehend what was going to happen to me and what my life was going to become. For the first couple of weeks, I don't really remember too much. I was in and out of consciousness a lot within the 3.5 weeks I was in hospital. I had a total of 12 surgeries. One of those surgeries was actually to amputate my leg higher. So I was originally amputated below the knee, and then they decided to amputate through the knee, which was a huge change in my life and a huge detour on where I thought that I was going to be. But during this whole process, I never really understood or knew the whole implication of what I was actually going through. And there was about a time about 2.5 weeks after this accident, and I was lying in bed. I could still feel both of my legs, and I just thought that the way that modern medicine was, and that I was just going to go to hospital. My leg was going to make it to hospital, and they were going to sew it back on. And I was going to go home and be a normal 12-year-old kid and go out and play football and live a normal life. That moment, about that 2.5 week period, when I looked under the blanket for the first time to discover that I was going to be an amputee for the rest of my life, a reaction from me that was quite confronting. And I can imagine that if any person in this room was starting to think that what they would be thinking in that particular moment. And I got quite emotional for about a 20-minute period, and there was two words that kept cycling through my mind, and it was, why me? And I think that's a fairly logical question to ask, and something that I think probably most of us would probably ask during this period. And about 20 minutes had passed, and I realised that I'm in a situation there where I have a choice. I could be an optimist or I could be a pessimist. I could either choose to go home and complain about what had happened to me for the rest of my life, or I could get back out and live life to the fullest and become the best person that I could possibly be, to become the best athlete that I possibly could be. Fast forward my journey a few years, all of a sudden I'm sitting in the water in a country of Belgium with an Australian jersey on representing Australia in water skiing. When I first lost my leg, I honestly thought that sport was completely gone, that I would never ever represent Australia again. But how life the path that life leads and where we kind of end up in life, sometimes when we sit down and we make those 10-year plans and we think where we're going is where we're going to get, it just ends up being something completely different. And when I'm representing Australia at the ripe old age of 15, 3 years after my accident, achieving a lifetime goal, then got off the water and won 2 silver and 2 bronze medals at my first World Championships in water skiing, was something that was quite surreal and something that I still stand here today and see that it was something that I never believed would ever happen. For me, when I was faced with adversity and when things happen in life, we kind of get stuck at a crossroads. And for me, I found my path and I found my purpose and where I want to go through sport. I knew that regardless of what had happened, that there was a pathway and a process that I could go through to be able to find something in life that I could be good at again. And I found that originally in water skiing, and for the next 6 years, I dedicated my life to it, and I became the best in the world in water skiing. And it was 2008 when I was at the pinnacle of my sport and looking for something probably bigger and better when I found the sport of track and field. Fortunately, I had enough contacts over the years of being in sport that I was invited to come down to a track that was about 400 metres behind me here, down to the Australian Institute of Sport, invited here to kind of come and try athletics and see what sport could be and what I could become. I was fortunate enough to meet up with a coach by the name of Irina Divoskina. A bit of a mouthful. So Ukrainian coach, probably one of the best coaches in the world, just got back from the Beijing Paralympic Games. Her 5 athletes won a total of 7 gold medals, broke 5 world records, and she was inviting me down to Canberra here to be a part of a program that was highly successful. So when I first got out here and got my first running leg fitted and finally got the chance to put it on and had a slow jog down the track, and was something that was, for me, it was a huge part of my journey that I saw myself for the first time, well, for the second time, the first time when I started water skiing again, that I felt normal, that I no longer felt like that I had a disability. I think in this day and age, we see a lot of people with disabilities on the TV, and we are becoming quite a diverse society, and I think through the Paralympic Games, we're starting to see more and more people with a disability in mainstream work and on mainstream media. But at the time when I first came down here in 2008, that was not the case. The Beijing Paralympic Games was the second Paralympic Games to be televised on national television, and it was televised on the ABC, which was fantastic for us, but still not on commercial television at that time. So I didn't even know that running even existed, and I never even thought when I lost my leg that I'd ever run again. After I got off the training paddock the first day, I walked up to the office and I sat down with my now coach, and she looked me in the eye and said, "Scott, if you want to do this and dedicate yourself to running and move to Canberra here, you'll be a world record holder and a Paralympic champion one day." When I look at the video from the very first time that I ever ran, I could not believe that would ever be a possibility. That video is actually floating around on YouTube somewhere, so I'd highly recommend going and have a look at that video. It was a stumbly, rickety run down the track. But sometimes we don't need to have a belief in ourselves. Sometimes that belief can come from other people. And I was fortunate enough that someone saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That somebody saw that I had potential, that somebody saw that I could be the best. And with that confidence behind me and from that confidence from her, I moved down to Canberra here, moved out of my local community in Temora, made the big step, the big journey down to the Big Smoke. Although anybody that's not in Canberra would realise that Canberra's not really the Big Smoke and it's still really just a country town. And that's part of the reason why I love being here in Canberra. But so for the next 10 years, I spent my time here in Canberra, and I was very fortunate that I have had quite a successful career in athletics as well. When I stepped away from water skiing, I was the best skier in the world. I'd done absolutely everything that was possible in water skiing to then take a step from being the very top of your game in a sport to then go back to the bottom of the ladder, where you're now ranked last in the world, to then work your way back up at that ladder to be then make my first Paralympic Games when I was 21. Represent Australia and win a silver medal at my first Paralympic Games, then kind of completely change who I was as an athlete and just started to think differently about ways that I could become better and be more holistic as an athlete. And I learned a lot of things in this time period, from being a silver medalist to when I became even more successful as a gold medalist. And I think that's something that's really important, and it is the theme here, is diversity. I look at the team that I have around me and the goal that we have, and I had the fortune, I was sitting out the back and I could hear a lot of the panel that was speaking earlier on, and how when you are in pursuit of a common goal and everybody's on the same page, how valuable that is. Whether that page is right or wrong is irrelevant, but I think it's really important that whatever that page is open, and as long as everybody believes in whatever the direction that you're going, you can really achieve some pretty amazing things. Sometimes you might end up at the wrong destination, but sometimes you end up achieving some pretty amazing things. And being a diverse workplace like this is here in Canberra, I go to training every day with a Ukrainian female coach. Our head coach is from Wales. My fiance, who trains with us every day, is German. One of the training mates was Czech, and some of the biometrics that work with us are New Zealander. I think it's kind of this sporting environment. I think is quite a way ahead when it comes to diversity, and we've realised how valuable across the board people with disabilities, women in sport, and across the board we have a huge different range of people who really contribute to a performance on the day. And when you see every single athlete that comes out of this place in particular, we have a whole big team behind us. And it's quite often seen that when we race, we are the person that's going out there to perform. But the reality is that there is a huge team that gets behind us to make sure that we can achieve the best that we can possibly achieve. From the London Paralympic Games, which for me was quite an amazing experience, where I had the ability to be able to walk out in centre stage in front of 80,000 screaming Poms and try and make sure that I could make them listen to the Australian anthem another time in their country. That was the number one goal when I went to London, to try and be able to go out there and race. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, I wasn't able to make them listen to the Australian anthem, but when I walked into that event, I was ranked 5th in the world. To be able to walk into that start line and be 100% confident in the process that I was on and the path that I was on, to lead for 90% of a race and finish second, was something that I was extremely proud of, and it's something that stays with me today, that the lessons that I learnt from that one race and the mistakes that we make along the way. And you look at that race, if you go back and watch it on YouTube, you'll see that there's a couple of moments in that race where when the gun went, everybody else went except for me. And within a short period of time, I realised that positive mindset that I had when I was 12 years old laying in a hospital bed and realised that I could be an optimist or a pessimist, you fast forward this 10 years down the track, I could have seen that moment as that race is completely over. I could have completely packed up shop and realised that I was not going to be able to win this race. But the positive nature of what I am and the optimist that I am, I gathered my thoughts up, and within 2 seconds of that race, I went from last to first. And for the next 70 metres, I was in front with a comfortable lead. But the last 20 metres of the race, I could feel a guy that was getting closer and closer, and as we dipped for the line, I could feel that the guy just got in front of me. But when I look at that race, you could really see it as two ways. You could see that I won a silver medal or I lost a gold medal. And again, look, the positive person that I am, I definitely think that I look at that race and I think that I 100% won a silver medal that day. I was expected to win 5th, expected to place about 5th in that race, and to win a silver medal was something that was quite amazing. Over the next, about 6 or 7 years, and the championships that kind of followed that, has been quite an amazing experience for me. I've been able to win the last 4 major championships in a row, break a world record like my coach when I first stepped off that training track. Those years before, was that the ripe old age of 18, that rickety runner with long hair, which has definitely migrated in different directions since. And to be able to achieve all those things that I had wanted to achieve in my whole career, to then be able to walk away from sport knowing that I could be a multiple world champion athlete in 2 different sports, to be a Paralympic champion, to reach the pinnacle of 2 different sports, was something that's quite amazing. But there is definitely, the story of me getting to where I am is one thing, but I think it's really important that along our journey in life, we're going to face a number of adversities and a number of challenges that are going to take us on all different sorts of directions, to take us down paths that we never ever thought possible. And I think it's something that every single person in this room is going to go through adversity. And I think it's quite often that we get stuck in what has happened rather than what we can do to get through what has happened. I think that if we, with the right support network around us and the right people to guide us along our way, and with the right attitude, we can really achieve some pretty amazing things. I've been fortunate that I've had some really great people around me, and through some of the darkest times in something like sport, mental health is something that's become quite a focus, because the pressures that come with being an athlete are quite intense. But it's something that I see quite regularly when I look at the farming community. I've unfortunately experienced firsthand when things aren't going fantastic in the farming industry, that it takes a huge mental toll on our farmers, and it filters all the way through to the top as well. In 2014, I was faced with a situation where within 2 weeks either side of Christmas, I lost two of my closest mates to mental health issues. It's something that was really, really devastating for me, and something that I think that really showed for the first time for me that, you know, there's the first two friends that I'd ever lost. For two guys who were the most positive people that I knew to be going through such mental health struggles, to then think that their only solution was to leave this world. I think within this industry as a whole, we need to have a bigger focus, and I know there has been a lot of things that are coming through in the mental health space in the farming industry, but it's something that we need to make sure that we are on top of, and something that we need to make sure that, you know, it starts very simplistically as a conversation. And I see so often within not only farming communities, but within society in Australia as a whole, and particularly in the male half of the population, how many of us here are guilty of asking every person we know, "Hey mate, how you going?" Something gets dropped on the daily. But when was the last time we actually picked up a phone and said, "Hey Jono, cut the crap, how are you?" It's something that's really important to me, and really important to us as a whole and as a community, that one conversation, to actually seriously ask each other and ask our mates, ask our family how they actually are going, how they're going mentally. And this is probably the biggest time at the moment, in probably the last 5 or 6 years, where we're faced with such huge mental burden on our farmers and within the industry as a whole. And there's no secret that the whole industry is suffering from drought. And it's something that we need to make sure that we pick up a phone and we make sure that we start from the top and we filter through our whole system, that we're actually looking after each other, looking after our family, looking after the people who are the lifeblood of Australia, which are our farmers. There is no doubt that without the farming industry in Australia, Australia does not exist. And we need to make sure that we get that message out there. We need to make sure that we're looking after our farmers. And I think it's fantastic that there's so many of the community within Australia that are getting behind the farmers in all the bio-bale movements and that type of thing. I think there's a lot of things that need to change in the way that things are going about it, and there's a lot of probably things that could happen better. But it's nice to see that community is actually being considered and being looked after. But I will leave today before I speak too long, because I have a habit of doing that. I think that there's probably a couple of key messages that we need that will hopefully come out today. When things are kind of going pear-shaped in our lives, make sure we have a really good, solid community around us. Life will have a habit of throwing curveballs at us, but it's the way that we react to them and the way we think about those things is the way we get through those. I would encourage every single person in this room to pick up a phone and ask them how their friends are, ask them how their mum is, how their brother, how their sister is. And the last, and I think the most important thing, is in what my message will be, which I haven't really touched on too much here, but it was something that I had the great privilege to be a part of, was the Safe Hands project, and I was fortunate enough to be an ambassador for the Safe Hands project that happened earlier in this year. Is that every single person in this room, we can change the way that we go about workplace safety by just thinking about things differently. The rules and regulations are there to keep us safe, but taking 2 seconds to think about what we're about to do can save a life, and it can save a leg. The safety process is not that hard. Every single time we walk to a road, we look down, look up, we look both ways, we have a risk assessment, and we make sure it's safe before we go. Workplace safety can be that simple. If you change the way that people think, we can change the way that people act, and we can save a few lives along the way. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. Oh my word, I could have listened to Scott forever. How fantastic is that? There's so many key messages, one of which, Scott, you made a bit of a faux pas, mate. You mentioned your fiancée. I believe you may have got married on the weekend. So it's your wife. Congratulations. Yeah. All good, all good. Alrighty, some key messages from Scott. Sport is hugely important in rural Australia. When things happen on the farm, it affects the broader community. So have a think about that. I really like the way Scott summed up his speech. Just pause for 20 seconds and ask, is it safe? And could I do it slightly differently? Think outside the box and think differently. Scott thought about, like, his family rang 000. He then rang the local hospital and got a much different result. If he hadn't had that hospital meet him, that ambulance rather, meet him 10 k's out of town, would the result have been different? I don't know. But it was the fact that he thought quickly and thought out of the box that yielded the result that he's got. And now, thankfully, he's here with us all. I liked his reflection on why me. We have a choice. So often in life we have choices. One thing, we can't choose everything in our life. One thing we can always choose is our attitude. And Scott has one that is absolutely shining, and it's a real credit to you. Sometimes where you end up in life is not where you expect, but it's what you choose to do with that situation that will define how happy you are and the contribution that you can make. Sometimes you won't win, but the learnings that you can have from those winnings, that silver medal that he won when he was 5th, he definitely won a silver medal that day. And I think what has happened, like quite often we think about, oh, what's happened? But it's a more important question that we can ask ourselves is, what can we do with what happened? So often in life, things happen that are out of our control. You've got choices. You can be a victim, or you can choose to go, okay, cool, this is a situation, how am I going to improve it? What can I actually do? So please join me once more in thanking the pocket rocket that is Scott Reardon. Okay, we've nearly finished day one. I've just got a couple of little things for tomorrow. So tomorrow we have got the Prime Minister coming to speak with us. So in order for us to all be there and show him a good force and how dedicated we are and passionate we are about agriculture, the bus is going to depart, for this afternoon. The buses are departing from here to the National Museum at 5:45 p.m. sharp. So don't worry about going to get changed, the cocktail function, just go as you are. The buses are leaving in about 10 minutes. There's going to be a presentation from Richard Colbeck. He's going to address us at the museum. There's a photo booth tonight, so don't be shy. Get in and have a little go and then tweet your little photos. There's going to be coaches from the museum back to the hotels. The first one's going to leave at 9 o'clock. The second one is at 9:30, and there will also be a bus back into the city at 9:30. Grab a drink upon arrival tonight. There's food and drink on offer. There are also museum tours. You can't take your food and drink with you on the